It's 2039. America didn't break apart. It was algorithmically torn into tribes with better hashtags. Coffee shops now require political loyalty scores, and family dinners have become emotional hazard pay. Welcome to the age of polarization, where every opinion is a battlefield, and a nuance has been canceled for moral ambiguity. Meet John, former deep state scientist turned political time hopper. He built a quantum time machine because therapy wasn't covered, and now he's hurling through history's most politically divided disasters to ask, how did we screw this up so badly? And in those times, has anyone ever tried not to be a flaming lunatic? From ancient gridlock to modern meltdown, John's on a mission to expose how polarization poisons republics. He'll uncover how civilizations collapsed under the weight of their own hate, and maybe, just maybe, figure out how not to join them. Welcome to the Citizen Sage Politiverse, where politics and history meet a deeper analysis of the current events shaping our world. Here, we go beyond the headlines to explore the forces driving society, past and present. No spin, no noise, just sharp insights and bold discussion. Let's dive in. Meet John Carter, not the one from Mars. So at this point, Mars sounds like a decent place to raise a family. No, this John is a genius from Ohio, a former deep state scientist turned inventor who got so tired of political insanity, he built a quantum-free energy time machine. For real. Not for fame, not for money, but because therapy was too expensive and his insurance didn't cover existential dread. Seriously, he needed to know if history had any cheat codes, hacks, or some kind of how to not ruin your republic manual hidden between the plagues and revolutions. Maybe there were some lessons to learn, assuming anyone could look up from their rage scrolling long enough to read them. It's 2039, and the United States has finally achieved its fullest potential as politically themed, a post-apocalyptic theme park with slightly better Wi-Fi. The country is now less a union and more like two divorced parents in an ugly custody battle over kids, a house, and the control of the thermostat. On one side, you've got the Red Patriots, ruling over the South and mostly the Midwest. Their slogan? Freedom, firearms, crying bald eagles, and flag-themed footwear. Redland's national pastimes included grilling meat no one can identify, shouting 1776 in traffic, and attending mandatory evening screenings of Ronald Reagan's greatest speeches, projected onto the sides of a Chick-fil-A truck. Then there's the woke republic, holding down the coast like a highly caffeinated, identity-obsessed yoga cult. Here, every street is named after a progressive icon. Dogs must be referred to as canine-identifying companions, and every latte is brewed with oat milk, self-affirmations, and at least 2 layers of social justice foe. Middle America? Well, they're gone. Now called the neutral zone, it's a barren land of cornfields and political refugees who are too scared to pick a side. They live off the grid, pay in cash, and whisper their opinions like it's 1984 with extra glue. Everything is political. Every single thing. Want coffee? Better have the correct political loyalty score. Freedom Beans only serves verified Red Patriots and throws out anyone who didn't have a video of themselves reciting the Pledge of Allegiance while holding a firearm and grilling a steak. They do give a 10% discount to anyone that can present their copy of the Constitution with a camouflage cover while also shouting, "No woke taxes!" really loud in the street. Meanwhile, Woke Rose offers climate-conscious decaf, but only to customers who pass a 12-question diversity quiz at checkout. They also throw anyone out that can't present a video of themselves performing slam poetry about climate change while riding an e-scooter. They also offer 10% discounts to anyone who can list 16 hyphenated social justice credentials of the Woke Republic Party's supreme leader while standing in a flamingo yoga pose. Need a ride? Uber's gone. Replaced by Ruber. Redland Uber features leather seats and Breitbart Newsfeed and Fox News Radio. And then you have Bluebird, the Blue Coalition Uber, with electric scooters, I love trees sweaters, and free pronoun pins. Even dating apps are divided. Red flags for patriots, woke up for progressives. Moderates are banned from both and must use Farmers Only 2.0 with less discourse. Government? Don't even ask. Congress hasn't passed a bill since the great legislative lockdown of 2027, which ended when both parties just stopped showing up and replaced themselves with AI avatars powered by Twitter arguments. AI controls everything now. Your shopping, your transportation, your friendships. If you so much as like a neutral meme, you lose points. Hug a relative with an opposing view? That's treason adjacent. Speak to a coworker from an opposite zone, you'll be flagged for ideological contamination and sent to a realignment retreat. Basically, a digital gulag with TikTok filters. Families don't speak. Schools are segregated by political leanings. Churches have party endorsements. Even music is split. Redland blasts Toby Keith remixes, while Bluetown only allows acoustic protest songs in minor key. How did it get this bad? Let's talk about the institutions that pour gasoline onto the fire. So here we have social media, the rage machine. Once a place to share memes and cute pet photos, by 2039, social media had evolved into the main engine of ideological warfare. AI-driven algorithms were optimized not only for connection, but for conflict. The more enraged you were, the more you spent scrolling. Outrage was monetized. Misinformation became a feature, not a flaw. News feeds were customized to your ideology. Reality on demand, tailored to your worst impulses. Political extremists trended daily, while moderates were shadow banned into digital oblivion. The algorithm punished nuance, rewarded tribalism, and made compromise a dirty word. John had once tried to post, "Maybe we should listen more and yell less." He was flagged for suspicious behavior and had to attend a royalty re-education program. Because kindness, that was subversive. We also have the legacy media. Their motto, fear for ratings. Seriously. Meanwhile, traditional media had its own apocalypse moment. Competing in the same attention economy, it traded journalism for entertainment, clickbait, and 24/7 panic programming. Every headline screamed catastrophe. Every anchor was a political warrior. Every news segment was secretly a fundraising pitch in disguise. You didn't watch to understand the world. You watched to feel superior, to hate the other side, to confirm that your bubble was right and theirs was psychotic. Both Redland and Bluetown had their own official state-run networks, Freedom Vision and Progressive Truth Network, respectively. Each broadcasted different facts, quote unquote. Each told their audiences they were under siege. Where each side was in their own political echo chamber, what was left to agree on? Political officials became leaders who led us off a cliff. You know, the people who were supposed to protect democracy, uphold the Constitution, and occasionally do their jobs? Yeah, they absolutely did not. Instead, they stared at a burning building labeled American Unity and said, "Great opportunity to fundraise." They gerrymandered districts so effectively, voters didn't choose representatives, representatives chose voters. They passed laws to suppress opposition turnout, often under the banner of election integrity, but mostly to rig the scoreboard. They refused to concede elections, claiming fraud every time they lost, but demanding parades when they won. And they normalized violence, not by openly endorsing it, but by winking at it, excusing it, and saying things like, "Well, people are just passionate." In the halls of Congress, every bill became an ideological purity test. There was no room for negotiation, no space for compromise. If you dared work with the other side, you were labeled a sellout, traitor, or worse, moderate. Yes, moderate became the new curse word. Elected officials didn't govern anymore. They performed. For X, threads, for cable news, clips, for a base trained to boo nuance and cheer for blood. Congress didn't just gridlock. It evaporated into political theater. A nonstop battle royale where the only real goal was to survive the next outrage cycle and win the clickbait headline. Legislation was out. Laser-focused rage posting was in. And every bill that happened to come onto the floor was an ideological purity test. Every vote was a chance to own the other side. No one negotiated, no one compromised because the base would punish them for it, maybe even physically. But worse than gridlock was what came next. Us versus them. Political leaders chasing votes and validation framed the opposing side as not just as rivals, but as existential threats. The rhetoric wasn't, we disagree on policy. It was, they hate America. They're coming for your children. They want to destroy everything you love. And from there, it was a short trip to dehumanization. The other side wasn't made of people anymore. They were socialist demons, fascist tyrants, baby killers, gun nuts, groomers, domestic terrorists, or enemies of the state. Every debate became a moral war. Every opponent became a monster. And once someone is a monster, well, you can justify pretty much anything, even violence. And so it came. Harassment of school board members, threats to election workers, politicians attacked at rallies, mass shootings inspired by manifestos built from political talking points, assaults outside of campaign offices. The presidential ruling party even castigated political opponents both in the legal system and also by killing the free speech of their opponents. Was it a civil war? Not officially. But it felt like low-grade, slow-burn civil conflict. The kind where the casualties are trust, empathy, and social cohesion, and the weapons are flags, conspiracy theories, persecuting political opponents, and baseball bats wrapped in ideology. And the scariest part? Became normal. While this wasn't condemned, it was contextualized, spun, or ignored, depending on who committed it. If your side did it, well, they were provoked. If the other side did it, poof, they're animals. Politicians spoke about unity on holidays, while fundraising off every fear every other day. Entire careers were not built on solving problems, but on squashing free speech, punishing political opponents, and on stoking hatred of imaginary enemies. And America? It didn't collapse in a blaze. It frayed, quietly, constantly, until almost no one could remember what it felt like to disagree without despising. John, watching it unfold again in his own time, scribbled grimly in his journal. It wasn't one moment that broke it. It was 1,000 daily choices to polarize, punish, and demonize. Till democracy wasn't a system, it was a team sport with riot gear. The nation hadn't hit civil war. Not yet. But with every broken debate, every loyalist echo chamber, every hate-fueled headline, it moved a little closer to the edge. And the ones steering the ship, they were too busy checking their approval ratings to notice. In short, America 2039 is a glorious disaster. So John does what any rational genius with unresolved emotional trauma would do. He hops into his homemade quantum-free energy machine, affectionately dubbed the Liberty Blender 5000, and sets off on a mission to visit history's worst polarization meltdowns, understand how it all went to hell, and maybe, just maybe, and find a way to fix this flaming dumpster fire of a future. Spoiler, it's gonna get wild. John lands in 44 BCE Rome, just in time to not get invited to Julius Caesar's surprise party. You know, the one where there's the stabbing and the historical trauma. Disguised as Junius or Highness, a visiting statement from a distant land of Buckeye, John infiltrates the Roman Senate, a place that smells of old wine, sweaty egos, and the distinct aroma of democracy on life support. At first, John is impressed. Marble columns, toga fashion, gladiator matches that make UFC look like a pillow fight. But it doesn't take long before he realizes he stepped into the world's first and most fabulous political dumpster fire. The Senate is split worse than a toddler's opinion at bedtime. On one side, the optimates, old school, conservative aristocrats clinging to tradition like it's their emotional support scroll. They want power, prestige, and absolutely no peasants telling them what to do. On the other side, the populares, self-proclaimed champions of the people, who talk democracy in public and plot, oops, I did a coup, in private. It's all theater. Everyone's corrupt, everyone's scheming, and everyone's got a statue of themselves somewhere, because modesty died 5 Caesars ago. John sits in the Senate debate. It goes something like, Senator 1, we must preserve the glory of Rome. Senator 2, Rome is for the people. Senator 3, I have a villa in Capri and I'm bored. Let's start a civil war. Every law is blocked. Every vote is a power grab. And every discussion ends with someone dramatically storming off in sandals shouting, "This is not what the Republic stood for." Meanwhile, outside the Senate walls, the streets are chaos. Employment is up. Bread prices are down, but still somehow a problem. And the only people making sense are gladiators. They solve problems by decapitation. Arguably more efficient than the Senate, although brutal. John tries to warn them. Hey, guys, just a suggestion. Maybe stop tearing each other apart for personal gain. You're kind of on the verge of creating an empire ruled by one dude with a laurel fetish. But no one listens. Instead, Caesar rolls in like a populist rock star. Let's fix this mess by giving me all the power. Ha ha ha. Half the crowd cheers. The other half sharpens their knives. John watches, horrified, as democracy gets shanked in the back 23 times and bleeds out on the Senate floor. A few days later, he sees Rome elect a new leader, Octavian, Caesar's heir who rebrands himself as Augustus and invents the empire. Democracy is quietly buried behind the statue of Jupiter in a military parade. Takeaway? When compromise dies, ambition takes over. When leaders care more about their own survival than the system's republics become empires. The C-SPAN had sword fights, and the filibuster involved actual phalanx. John jots it down in his time travel journal. Rome didn't fall in a day. It just bickered itself into tyranny over a few decades. 10 out of 10 historical disaster. Would not recommend. He dusts off his sandals, hops back into the Liberty Blender 5000, and heads to the next collapse. Spoiler, it involves muskets, cotton, and a lot of shouting in old-timey accents. John lands in 1861, Washington, D.C., wearing aviators, denim, and a sarcastic grin. He immediately regrets not changing it to something, more bulletproof. He strolls into a dusty saloon and casually asks the bartender for a coffee. The bartender squints. Union or Confederacy? John, ever the centrist, replies, just cream. The room goes dead silent. Everyone's staring at him. The Confederate officer reaches for his saber. A Union loyalist stands up, knocking over his chair. Somewhere, a banjo stops playing mid-note, and the pianist leaves out of the back door. John backs out slowly before someone starts reenacting Gettysburg the prequel with him as the opening casualty. Welcome to the United States of severely un-United States, where compromise is canceled, moderation is a moral crime, and nuance has been tarred, feathered, and run out of town on a rail. He poses as a neutral observer from the Oregon Territory, a fancy way of saying, don't shoot me, I'm just watching. Geography is still a mystery west of the Mississippi, so no one really questions him. He attends political meetings in both North and South. What he finds isn't a discussion, it's pure weaponized ideology. In northern cities, John hears abolitionists calling for immediate emancipation and full civil rights. Not really bad, right? The sentiment is morally righteous. But the tone is increasingly militant. Anyone who even suggests gradual reform is shouted down as a Southern sympathizer, or worse, a moderate. Sound familiar? The Republican Party, barely a decade old, had increasingly become the voice of anti-slavery expansion, although not a majority opinion in the party. But it's not just policy anymore. It's a moral war. And war doesn't tolerate dissent. In the South, the vibe is paranoid aristocracy. Plantation owners paint the Union as a tyrannical force bent on destroying Southern heritage, a genteel euphemism for brutal chattel slavery in a free labor economy built on human bondage. They invoke states' rights, only when it's about the right to own people. They hand out pamphlets filled with pseudoscience, biblical references of slavery, and fiery us versus them rhetoric. The North wants to erase our way of life. They're coming for our land, our honor, and our women. They'll enslave us like we enslave them. The irony is completely lost on them. Back in the Capitol, John watches the center collapse. The Whig Party is dead, unable to bridge the divide. The Democratic Party has split in two. Northern and Southern factions can't even agree on what year it is, let alone a platform. No national party can unite the country anymore. The only thing both sides agree on is that the other side is the apocalypse in a hat. Moderates, extinct. The North is industrializing, full of railroads, wage labor, and growing cities. The South is agrarian, dependent on slave labor, and convinced that cotton, tobacco, and sugar is divine. Each region sees the other as economically incompatible and morally irredeemable. Tariffs, trade policies, and even infrastructure spending become battlegrounds. Newspaper on both sides fuel the fire. Every story is spun for maximum paranoia. Editors don't print facts, they print rage-fueled opinion disguised as truth. Pamphlets spread conspiracy theories. Southern press claims Lincoln wants to marry a black woman and enslave white children. Northern press paints every Southerner as a cartoon villain and a cravat. It's less journalism, more 19th century Facebook with excellent grammar and eloquent old-timey accents. Then comes the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency without a single Southern electoral vote. To the South, this is a confirmation that they've lost all power in the Union. They panic, not quietly, not with letters, with secession. Before President Lincoln's inauguration, South Carolina bills first, then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, each one holding a "we're done here" parade, complete with flags, angry mobs, and cannonballs that feel way too real. Lincoln begs for unity. He offers compromise after compromise. He gives speeches so calm and reasonable, it might as well have been therapy sessions. But it doesn't work. Enter the Civil War. April 1861. Fort Sumter, boom. And just like that, bullets speak louder than ballots. John visits military camps on both sides. He meets soldiers. Good people, scared people, tired people. Brainwashed by fear, pride, and 30 years of polarization. They don't know what tariffs are. They just know the guy on the other side is the enemy, and they have to fight. He watches cousins shoot each other across lines. Churches split. Entire towns fracture. This isn't politics anymore, it's personal. By 1865, 620,000 Americans are dead. Cities are ash. Railroads twisted like pretzels. Slavery is technically abolished, but racism and oppression? Alive and kicking, at least for the next 150 plus years. Takeaway? When political identity becomes sacred and compromise becomes betrayal, you don't get debate, you get war. Slavery, states' rights, economic rivalry, party collapse, media manipulation, existential fear. It wasn't one thing, it was everything. John scribbles in his journal, dodging debris and judgmental horses. Polarization plus fear equals civil war. Note to self. Next time, bring Kevlar. And maybe a more optimistic time period. He quickly cranks the Liberty Blender 5000 to emergency exit mode and disappears in a flash of quantum light. Next stop, jazz clubs, beer halls, and the Weimar Republic's very own slow-motion meltdown. John moonwalks into 1920s Berlin because, why not? He figured if democracy was going to die, it might as well go out to the sound of the saxophone and well-dressed people chain-smoking in fur coats. At first glance, Berlin looks like a fever dream. Neon lights, jazz clubs, flappers doing the Charleston like they're trying to dance away the impending doom. Intellectuals sip espresso while arguing about Nietzsche. And newspapers? Oh, they're basically Reddit threads in print form. Everyone's yelling, no one's agreeing, and reality is optional. Kind of like an echo chamber. John wanders into a cafe called Das Chaos. It's half Parisian salon, half political cage match. He sits between a communist pamphleteer and a guy who insists Germany's future is being held back by, quote unquote, certain people. No, spoiler, that guy definitely Hitler adjacent. Isn't that just the weird little man with the angry speeches? Someone asks. The other replies, he'll never catch on. John sips his coffee nervously. He knows how this movie ends. Outside, Berlin's streets are boiling. On one corner, socialist rally demands revolution. On the other, far-right paramilitary groups in matching armbands chant about national purity. In the middle, literal street brawls. Yes, political debates in 1920s Germany were often settled with brass knuckles and bricks, not ballots. Meanwhile, the economy is in freefall. The Reichsmark is worth less than monopoly money. John watches as a man tries to buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of cash. But by the time he gets to the front of the line, their prices have tripled. The man trades in the bread for the wheelbarrow. It's worth more. And the Weimar government? Oh, it's vibing in full collapse mode. Hyperpartisan factions fill the Reichstag. That's German for barely functioning legislature. Every vote is a circus. Coalitions break faster than IKEA shelves during an earthquake. No one trusts the media. No one trusts elections. And trust in democracy? Let's just say that's been traded in for schnitzel and shame. John chats with a moderate politician. Poor guy just wants to pass a healthcare bill. But try to work with both sides, he says. Within 5 minutes, he's accused of being a Bolshevik and a fascist sympathizer. A waitress throws soup at him. The band doesn't stop playing. Even among average citizens, hope is a punchline. People are either radicalized, apathetic, or stocking up on boots for the coming storm. Then John sees him. A failed painter, a small mustache, the charisma, saying things like, "Make Germany great again," but in German and with way more yelling. He's drawing a crowd, a big one. People are tired, perpetually broke, starving, angry, and scared. And this man's offering simple answers to complex problems. Sounds familiar? Takeaway. When a democracy loses its grip on economic reality and public trust, extremists start looking like saviors. The center collapses, the loudest voices take over. The next thing you know, you've got World War II and 12 years of absolute horror. John scribbles in his journal as the band plays, a minor key version of Mac the Knife. No, when the cafe serves jazz and fascism on the same menu, it's probably time to intervene. He finishes his drink, gives Hitler the side eye, and hits the quantum throttle. Next stop, powdered wigs, angry peasants, and a guillotine with an overbooked schedule. Vive la révolution! John beams into 1790s Paris and immediately regrets wearing clean shoes. He lands straight in the middle of a bread riot, surrounded by angry Parisians holding signs, pitchforks, and extremely stale baguettes that doubles as blunt instruments. Before he can say bonjour, a revolutionary shoves 2 options in his face, a pitchfork or a baguette. John takes both. After all, carbs and chaos are kind of his coping mechanisms. Welcome to revolutionary France. Population, furious. On one side, you've got the aristocrats, sipping wine on balconies, wearing powdered wigs that cost more than entire villages, and clapping offbeat to chamber music. If TikTok had existed, they'd be doing trend dances in Versailles with captions like, "Bless nobility. Nobility vibes. Let them eat cake." On the other side, literally everyone else, peasants, merchants, unemployed, philosophers, all starving, taxed to death, and done with monarchy energy. John walks past a cafe where someone's passionately yelling, "Liberté, égalité, fraternité," while simultaneously constructing a makeshift guillotine made out of chair legs and revolutionary enthusiasm. He ducks into a crowd outside the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny now reduced to rubble and Instagram selfies, or, in this case, old oil painting sketches. A guy next to him says, "This is the birth of a new world. Mon frère." 5 minutes later, that same guy's chasing a suspected royalist with a cleaver. Things escalate quickly into the revolution. John tries to blend in by muttering vague anti-monarchy slogans and pretending he's from the liberated province of Ohio Sorcien. It works, well, for a while. He attends a revolutionary tribunal. Spoiler, it's not a trial. It's a high-speed kangaroo court with powdered wigs, shouting, and guaranteed death sentence if your favorite color is gold. He watches as aristocrats, suspected monarchs, and people with suspiciously clean boots are sent to the guillotine like in a French drive-thru. John sees Robespierre, the revolution's so-called moral compass, giving speeches about justice, purity, and purging enemies of the Republic. For a guy obsessed with equality, he's suspiciously fond of chopping necks. Robespierre is basically the world's first cancel culture influencer, with a much sharper and permanent lock button. Even everyday folks start turning on each other. Didn't yell "Vive la Révolution" loud enough? You're a traitor. Wear laces? You're bourgeoisie. Forget to tip your revolutionary barista? Say hello to Madame Guillotine. John's cover is blown when someone overhears him ask what a croissant is. Suddenly, he's accused of being a royalist spy. A crowd surrounds him. He clutches his baguette like a shield. He covertly presses the button to his time machine. Thankfully, the Liberty Blender 5000 materializes just in time. John jumps in as someone yells, "He said merci in the wrong tone." Takeaway? When the system is so broken that reform feels impossible, revolution becomes inevitable. But once the mob gets a taste of justice, it doesn't stop at the guilty. It comes for everyone. John jots it in his journal as the guillotine blade drops in the distance. Revolutions are like French wine. Don't say anything about monarchs in Paris ever. He sets coordinates for his next stop, a country with no kings, no queens, and apparently no jail. Rwanda, 1994. John materializes in Kigali, Rwanda, in the spring of 1994. The moment he steps out of the Liberty Blender 5000, he notices it. Not the heat, not the beautiful, lush rolling hills, but the tension. It's thick, electric, silent in the most dangerous kind of way, like the air before a lightning storm. That is, if the storm came with machetes and propaganda. Everywhere he goes, radios crackle, from houses, shops, and street corners. But they aren't playing music. They're playing something far worse. Televisión Libre des Mille Collines. RTLM for short. It's not information. It's incitement with a beat. The broadcast loops phrases like cockroaches and weeds, referring to the Tutsi minority. It blames them for every problem, then encourages action. Not political action, extermination. John watches a young man nodding along with the broadcast. This is dangerous, John warns. This is how societies collapse. Dehumanization, division, propaganda. The man shrugs. It's just talk. It always is until it isn't. Do you understand how it got this bad? John traces it back to colonial engineering. Before Europeans arrived, Hutu and Tutsi were fluid social categories, more than rigid ethnicity. A person could be born Hutu and rise to Tutsi status or vice versa. But then came the Belgians. Colonial rulers turned social lines into racial categories, issuing ethnic ID cards based on skin tone, height, and pseudoscience. They favored Tutsis for leadership and education, setting the stage for deep structural resentment. When Rwanda gained independence in 1962, the power structure flipped. Hutus took control, and the cycle of fear and revenge began. By the 1990s, the country was a pressure cooker. Decades of identity-based favoritism, repression, poverty, and political scapegoating. Hutu extremists in the government had spent years preparing for genocide. training militias, compiling death lists, and setting up logistics. The president's plane being shot down on April 6, 1994, was not the cause of the genocide. It was the pretext, or rather the excuse. Within hours, roadblocks appeared, militias roamed freely, RTLM's talk became marching orders, and then came the genocide. John watched in horror as neighbors, people who once borrowed sugar from each other, turned into killers overnight. Armed with machetes and a head and heart full of hate, they began to hunt friends, teachers, even family. Churches become slaughterhouses, classrooms became tombs. He tries to stop it, pleads with village leaders to shut off the radios, offers sanctuary to those fleeing in the Liberty Blender 5000. He even disables a broadcast tower, but it's way too late. The poison is already flowing in their bloodstreams. Because once a person is convinced the other side isn't human, violence becomes a virtue, or even a right. And the worst part, the world watches and does absolutely nothing. Despite warnings from UN officials on the ground, including General Romeo Dallaire, and detailed reports from aid workers and journalists, the international community fails to act. The U.S., haunted by its failure in Somalia, avoids the word genocide entirely. The UN pulls most of its peacekeepers. Rwanda is left to bleed and suffer unspeakable human tragedy alone. John ends up helping a small group of Tutsi families, moving through forests by night and hiding by day. It's the only time during his travels that he truly breaks down. These aren't soldiers, these are children, mothers, grandfathers. They are being hunted like animals by neighbors who, just days earlier, smiled at them in the marketplace. What horrified him most? It's how ordinary the executioners are. Not monsters, not trained soldiers, just people. People who listened to enough lies soaked in fear, animus, vitriol, and found themselves swinging machetes in the name of righteousness. In just 100 days, over 800,000 people, primarily Tutsis, along with the moderate Hutus, are murdered. Not in a battlefield, in villages, churches, and homes. So what's the takeaway? Political polarization, when fueled by colonial legacy, identity manipulation, and mass propaganda, becomes a fuse. Dehumanization turns neighbor into enemy. Words become weapons, and genocide stops being unthinkable, it becomes logistics. John writes in his journal with a shaking hand. They didn't need nukes. Just a radio, a lie, and enough fear to burn everything and everyone. He watches the sun rise over a nation soaked in silence, blood, and smoke, then quietly powers up the Liberty Blender 5000 and leaves Rwanda behind. But the images, they'll follow him. Next stop, Yugoslavia, where ethnic nationalism goes on a Balkan bender, and multi-ethnic harmony is shattered, again in the name of us versus them. John drops into early 1990s Yugoslavia, just in time to witness the country go from multicultural harmony and to ethnic bloodbath faster than anyone thought possible. At first glance, everything looks stable. Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, Slovenes, Macedonians, and Albanians live side by side, shopping in the same markets, watching the same soccer games, even marrying across ethnic and religious lines. It's not perfect, but it's holding. Then John scratches beneath the surface. He lands in Sarajevo, often called the Jerusalem of Europe, a city where Muslims, Christians, and Jews have coexisted for centuries. But now, tensions are simmering. Nationalist graffiti appears on walls. Neighbors stop waving. Politicians start trading unity slogans for fear-based tribal appeals. The language shifts. Not we, but us and them. John visits a radio station. The airwaves are a firehouse of nationalist propaganda, dripping with fear, blame, and historical grievance. One announcer rants, "They're taking our culture." Another warns, "They'll wipe us out if we don't act first." The message is loud and clear. The other side isn't just different, they're dangerous. It comes from all angles. One faction says, they're not real Yugoslavs. Another says, we need to protect our bloodline. A third, they've always hated us, now it's our turn. Sound familiar yet? Elections arrive, but they are not about taxes or education anymore. Political parties have stopped representing ideas and now openly represent ethnic identity. Campaigns feature flags, weapons, and thinly veiled threats. Voting becomes less about vision and more about survival. John watches as the media fractures. One channel praises unity, the next calls for revenge. Truth is optional in the echo chamber. Fear is mandatory. Everyone lives in their own tribal bubble, where the only facts that matter are the ones that feed the fire. Then it gets personal. John meets a group of young friends, a Serb, a Croat, and a Bosniak, laughing and teasing each other about soccer teams. But a year later, they're on opposite sides of the Civil War. Two are in uniform, the third is dead. Yugoslavia begins to fall apart at the seams. Slovenia breaks off. Croatia follows. Serbia digs in. Bosnia becomes the ground zero for the unraveling. Civilians are caught between nationalist armies, rogue militias, and genocidal agendas. Churches are bombed. Mosques are burned. Villages are ethnically cleansed. That's the polite term. What it means is systematic rape, murder, and forced deportation based solely on identity. John walks through the towns where people used to argue about taxes. Now they argue over who deserves to exist. Then came Srebrenica. In July 1995, over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were rounded up and executed in cold blood. Not in chaos, but in methodical, bureaucratic precision, by men who once lived down the street from their victims. It's a genocide, not ancient history. In 1990s Europe, with fax machines and Coca-Cola. And it didn't begin with a war. It began with political polarization, with us versus them thinking, blaming one specific group for national problems over others. With leaders turning identity into a weapon and citizens turning on each other over flags, surnames, and Sunday sermons. John stares in horror. This wasn't inevitable. It was constructed, brick by brick, lie by lie, speech by speech. Until enough people believed that difference equals threat, and violence became a logical next step, even warranted. Takeaway? Political polarization isn't just disagreement. When it's fueled by fear, ethnic divisions, and unchecked propaganda. It becomes a pipeline to war, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. It doesn't matter how modern or civilized a nation is. When enough people stop seeing others as humans, civil society collapses and collapses fast. John, hands trembling, write in his journal. This was a country with art, electricity, literature, and it only took a few years of fear-driven politics to reduce it to rubble and mass graves. He looks at the bombed-out remnants of Sarajevo, once a beacon of multiculturalism, now carved into battlegrounds and ghost neighborhoods. Then he enters the coordinates. USA 2025, with a knot in his chest. Time to see if we're repeating the same history, just with better cell reception and social media. And with that, the Liberty Blender 5000 vanishes into the ether, onward to a future that looks way too much like the past. John touches down in his own past, 2025 America. The land of the three, home of the terminally online and physically disconnected. At first, he's nostalgic. The Starbucks, there it is, it still accepts dollars, not digital loyalty scores. People still go outside occasionally, and there's no one scanning his political loyalty score or asking if he wants to do anything for a 10% discount or handing him a sandwich. That was absolute bliss. But within minutes, the cracks are obvious. He walks into a coffee shop. The barista's arguing with the customer. Not about the order, but about his latest viral X tweet. Something about masks, vaccines, or climate change. That's not even sure anymore. All he knows is someone brought a laminated copy of a meme as evidence, and they're winning the argument. He scrolls through social media. Big mistake. Cousins are disowning each other over Facebook comments. TikTok's offering one easy step to spot a communist. Entire Reddit threads are dedicated to proving birds aren't real, and Michelle Obama is an alien lizard from Venus. John watches as the algorithm demagogues serve up outrage like fast food. Every swipe makes people angrier, more convinced they're right, and more convinced the other side is plotting their doom from a Whole Foods parking lot. He attends a town hall in Wisconsin. A senator is asked about healthcare. Instead, she launches into a 15-minute rant about drag queens in libraries, hamburgers being too woke, and how God told her personally to ban electric vehicles. No one noticed that she didn't even bother to answer the question. Instead, they cheered like it's a Taylor Swift concert. Meanwhile, the opposing side accuses her of fascism, sexism, and the cultural genocide of oat milk. Also, someone throws a gluten-free muffin at her. It misses. John watches the news, or rather, he watches two separate news universes. One claims the country is under siege by radical leftist lizard people using wind turbines to destroy freedom. The other says democracy will die if someone wears a red hat within 100 feet of a government building. He tries to find the middle ground. Turns out it's been bulldozed to make way for a 24/7 outrage factory. He visits campaign headquarters. The moderate candidates, gone. They've been primaried out of existence. John sees voters at rallies clapping like train seals, not because policies are good, but because someone destroyed the other side with quote-unquote facts and logic, or posted a meme of their opponent photoshopped as a Soviet chicken. Political discourse has been reduced to alternative facts, reels, roasts, and rage clicks. Everyone seems really okay with that. Takeaway: America isn't being destroyed by war, famine, or even alien invasion. It's being slowly microwaved by fake facts, national security relationships, memes, political branding, forced deportations, tariffs, and algorithmic rage addictions on social media. The collapse isn't loud. It's a low-frequency buzz you don't notice until your democracy smells like burnt popcorn. This isn't the beginning of the end. It's the middle of the meme. We've replaced thoughtful debate with GIF reactions and expect things to hold. As he powers up the Liberty Blender 5000 for the final leg of his journey, he mutters, "Maybe the Romans had it easy, or at least their fall came with togas and sword fights. We've got mindless hashtags and hot takes. Next stop, 2039. America's split, broken, and looking like the sequel no one wanted. It's time to figure out if there's still something left to save." The moment where we all ask if the dumpster fire can be put out with hope and maybe a fire hose made of compromise. John Carter stood quietly in the shadow of what remained of the Lincoln Memorial, now surrounded by neon barricades, drone surveillance cameras, and what appeared to be a juice bar that only accepted red coin. He'd spent the past decade surviving a nation that cannibalized itself, not with warheads or plagues, but with political corruption, persecution of political opponents, hashtags, loyalty scores, and rage clicks. The worst part, it didn't have to be this way. After fleeing multiple near arrests, a canceled job, a failed relocation plan, a sabotage sandwich, and a family dinner that made Game of Thrones feel emotionally healthy, John found himself underground, literally, an in cafe where people still had conversations. Not "debate me, bro" TikToks. Not yelling matches, not performative takedowns, just honest to goodness talking. The room was dim, smelled like coffee, regret, and maybe even hope. A few dozen people gathered, many of them flagged as unpatriotic, misinformed, or worse, moderate. John sat at the table. Someone passed him with a history book, an actual paper book. He cracked it open like a sacred artifact. "We're all tired," said the woman next to him. "Tired of pretending this is normal." Another person nodded. "I just want to be able to talk to my dad again, without being accused of hating America or wanting it to burn down." Someone else muttered, "Remember when the internet wasn't a weapon?" John cleared his throat. He didn't know what made him speak, but once he started, the words tumbled out like they had been waiting forever. "We saw what happened to Rome, and to France and Rwanda. We saw what happened when people stopped seeing each other as human. And what happened? We did the same thing, fancier tech and a worse soundtrack." He paused. "We've seen all of this before. I've traveled through every era where polarization cracked societies wide open," John said. "And guess what? We're not special. We are just the latest in a long line of civilizations that ignored the flashing warning signs." "Wait, why did you travel to every era?" a woman asked, looking confused. Then he opened his journal and laid out the parallels. In the Roman Republic, senators chose self-preservation over governance. Today, Congress has spent decades in a filibuster-fueled coma, blocking more than it builds and weaponizing procedures instead of solving anything. Caesar didn't kill democracy. Political egos and elite corruption did. "We mock the toga-wearing backstabbers," John said. "But our politicians just do it in suits, on social media, and in press releases." In the 1860s, America tore apart once before, when compromise collapsed and ideology became destiny. Now, states talk openly about secession again. National divorce trends monthly. Families cancel each other over dinner. The flag may be different, but the tribalism's the same. The more we tie morality to partisanship, John warned, the more we are to swap ballots for bullets again. In the 1920s, economic chaos and political failure allowed extremists to rise by offering simple lies to complex problems. Sound familiar? Now we've got influencers selling conspiracies, politicians peddling alternative realities, and grifters turning fear into merchandise. They had hyperinflation and Hitler, John said. We've got misinformation, populist cults, and politically motivated merch drops. In revolutionary France, inequity sparked a movement, but it didn't stop at justice. It devoured itself, turning mob rule into blood sport. Today, social media cancel mobs don't use guillotines, but reputations, careers, and livelihoods are still publicly executed. The more we scream about purity, the less room we leave for grace, growth, and redemption. Robespierre tweeted once too many times, John joked. And then they guillotined him too. Rwanda didn't collapse for more. It collapsed because hate that was stoked by historical inequalities was normalized on the radio, and eventually that hate was acted upon by machetes. In 2039, America's digital equivalent is just as terrifying. AI-curated echo chambers, radio-style rage streams, deepfakes, and propaganda masquerading as just content. Dehumanization always starts with jokes and ends in tragedy, John said. While we let people be labeled as threats for clicks, the outcome isn't a laugh. It's a grave. Yugoslavia fell apart when political leaders exploited ethnic divisions and turned neighbors into enemies. America now divides among lines of race, class, faith, and party, with both sides convinced the other is hell-bent on erasure. People don't see citizens anymore, they see combatants. Yugoslavia didn't think it could fall either, John said, until the maps were redrawn in blood. John looked at the group, their faces pale with recognition. This wasn't just history. This was their lives. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. Because seeing the collapse clearly meant they could still do something about it. Was America doomed to live out the rest of its life as a bipolar wasteland with great memes and terrible governance? John wasn't so sure. Because in that cafe, for the first time in years, he saw the tiniest flicker of something real, possibility. John offered a roadmap, not a miracle cure, but a start. Here's what the group talked about that night. The not-so-secret recipe for saving a dying democracy. 1. Election reform. because actual democracy shouldn't feel like a reality show. Rank choice voting to give power back to the people, not extremists. End gerrymandering so districts reflect real communities, not partisan chess moves. Open primaries so moderates can survive the political Hunger Games. Break the media bubbles and algorithmic overhaul, because facts shouldn't be optional. Media literacy education, starting in elementary school. Transparency laws for political ads and influencer funding. Break up media monopolies so 6 corporations don't own all the outrage. Regulate social media platforms to stop incentivizing outrage and misinformation. Promote media literacy in schools, because people shouldn't trust a meme more than a PhD. Restore the trust in institutions, or just make new ones that aren't broken. Depoliticize courts by enforcing term limits and balanced appointments. End lobbying as we know it. Completely get money out of politics. Rebuild local governments that are actually responsive to their people. Rebuild social unity. Talk to your neighbor before reporting them. Cross-ideological community projects like fixing potholes in democracy. Citizen assemblies where people discuss issues without media filters. Ban loyalty scores and political blacklists. Forever. Social reconnection. Start cross-party dialogue initiatives in communities and schools. Incentivize collaboration at the local level. Stop letting political parties dictate personal morality. Depersonalize politics. Remember that your neighbor isn't your enemy, even if they watch the other news channel. Encourage leaders to model civic grace, not clickbait cruelty. Accept that disagreement is not danger, and sometimes compromise is actually patriotic. That night, John stayed in the cafe long after everyone had left. The lights dimmed, coffee cooled, but his thoughts buzzed louder than ever. He opened his battered journal and wrote, "If we can learn to build echo chambers this powerful, maybe we can learn to build bridges too. Not because we agree on everything, but because we must live with each other anyway. We've repeated enough of the past. Let's try writing a new future. One without secret cafes, one without loyalty scores, one where the loudest voices don't drown out the decent ones." He didn't know if the country could heal. He didn't know if his voice would even matter. But as long as people were still gathering in forgotten corners, still whispering about solutions, still remembering how to be people first and partisan second, maybe, just maybe, it wasn't over yet. John closed his journal. This one wasn't written for historians, it was written for survivors. He looked around. John packed up the Liberty Blender 5000, but before leaving, he smiled. This time machine ran on quantum energy. The next one, hope, and maybe a backup battery made of common sense.